The blazing Arizona sun bore down mercilessly as Josephine Turner stood on the auction block, her pale blue dress hanging from her thin frame like a tattered flag on a windless day. The auctioneer's voice boomed across the dusty town square of Redemption, Arizona Territory, in the summer of 1875, as he gestured toward her with undisguised contempt. "What'll you give for this one, gentlemen? Not much to look at, I'll grant you that. Skinny as a rail and probably not worth the feed she'll eat." Laughter rippled through the crowd of ranch hands, miners, and townspeople. Josephine kept her eyes fixed on the distant mountains, refusing to acknowledge the humiliation burning through her veins. 22 years old and being sold like livestock because her uncle's gambling debts had finally caught up with him. Now he was dead and she was collateral. "She's probably useless for real work," the auctioneer continued, giving her arm a rough shake. "But she might make someone a passable wife if you're not too particular." More laughter, crueler this time. Josephine bit the inside of her cheek until she tasted blood, determined not to cry. "Do I hear $5? Anyone? $4 for the girl?" Silence. The crowd shuffled their feet in the dust. $3. $2. The pause stretched unbearably. $1. The auctioneer asked, exasperation evident in his voice. "Surely someone will pay a single dollar. I'll take her for $1." The voice came from the back of the crowd. People turned and parted to reveal a tall man leaning against a hitching post. His face was partially obscured by the brim of his dusty hat, but Josephine could see a strong jaw covered with several days' worth of stubble. He straightened and walked forward, spurs jingling with each step. The auctioneer's eyebrows shot up. "Well now, seems like somebody's feeling charitable today. Sold to Mr. Archer, Adam Archer." He approached the platform, fishing a silver dollar from his pocket and flipping it to the auctioneer. Then he looked up at Josephine, and she found herself staring into eyes the color of a summer storm. "Come on down from there, miss. Got a long ride ahead of us." Josephine hesitated, her stomach knotting with fear. Who was this man? What did he want with her? But what choice did she have? She descended the steps on trembling legs, her meager belongings a small cloth bag containing a hairbrush, a faded photograph of her parents, and a change of clothes clutched tightly against her chest. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said quietly for her ears alone, "but we need to leave town now." "Follow me?" Adam Archer's horse was a magnificent chestnut stallion, well-muscled and clearly well-cared for, worth 100 times what he'd just paid for her. He helped her mount behind him, her legs awkwardly arranged to the side due to her dress. "Hold on," he instructed, and she reluctantly placed her hands at his waist as he urged the horse forward. They rode in silence for nearly an hour, leaving the town of Redemption behind and heading into open country. Josephine's mind raced with possibilities, each more terrifying than the last. Was he taking her to some remote location to have his way with her? Was she to be a servant on his ranch? Or perhaps he intended to sell her again at a higher price. Finally, when they reached a small stream, Adam stopped the horse and dismounted, offering his hand to help her down. She ignored it, sliding awkwardly to the ground on her own. "Why did you buy me?" she demanded, finding her voice at last. Adam removed his hat, revealing thick, dark hair that curled slightly at his temples. Up close, she could see he was younger than she'd initially thought, perhaps in his late 20s. His face was weathered from sun and wind, but handsome in a rugged way. "I didn't buy you, Miss Turner. I paid $1 to free you from that auction block. You're not my property." Josephine blinked in surprise. "How do you know my name?" "I knew your father, Thomas Turner. He was a good man." "You knew my father?" She hadn't expected that. Her parents had died of fever when she was 15, leaving her in the care of her uncle. "How?" "He saved my life during the war. I was shot at Antietam, and he dragged me to safety." Adam dipped his bandana in the stream and wiped the dust from his face. "When I heard his brother was dead and his niece was being auctioned off in Redemption, I rode straight through from Tucson." Josephine struggled to process this information. "So you don't expect anything from me?" A flash of something perhaps offense crossed Adam's face. No, Miss Turner, I owed your father a debt I could never repay. Helping his daughter seemed the least I could do. Where are we going, then? I have a ranch about 3 hours' ride from here. The Double A, it's not much, but it's growing. You can stay there until you decide what you want to do. I have a cabin for the ranch cook that's empty right now. He's visiting family back east. It'll give you privacy. Josephine's legs nearly buckled with relief. She sank down onto a nearby rock, overwhelmed by the day's events and this unexpected kindness. Thank you, Mr. Archer. Adam, he corrected, handing her his canteen. Drink some water, it's hot today. She accepted the water gratefully, taking small sips. I can cook and clean, she offered. I don't want charity. A hint of a smile touched his lips. Good, because I wasn't offering any. Ranch hands work for their keep at the Double A. You can help with the cooking and whatever else needs doing that suits your abilities. His words stung slightly, reminding her of the auctioneer's assessment. I'm not useless, you know, despite what they said. Adam's eyes met hers directly. I never thought you were, Miss Turner. Josephine, she said softly, or Joe, since we're using first names. He nodded and replaced his hat. We should get moving if we want to reach the ranch before dark. The rest of the journey passed with occasional conversation as Adam pointed out landmarks and told her about the ranch. The Double A was still small by territory standards, just over 1,000 acres with a modest herd of cattle, and a few horses he was breeding. He had 4 regular hands working for him, plus a cook when old Pete returned from visiting his daughter back in Ohio. As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, they crested a ridge, and Josephine caught her first glimpse of what would become her new home. The ranch house was larger than she expected, a sturdy 2-story structure built of logs and stone with a wide porch. Several outbuildings clustered nearby, and a corral held about a dozen horses. In the distance, she could see cattle grazing on the grasslands that stretched toward distant mountains. It's beautiful, she murmured, genuinely impressed. It's home, Adam replied simply, but she caught the note of pride in his voice. As they approached, a man emerged from one of the outbuildings, raising a hand in greeting. Adam returned the gesture as they rode into the yard. That's Hank, my foreman, Adam explained, dismounting before helping Josephine down. Hank approached, his curious gaze moving from Adam to Josephine. He was an older man with graying hair and a weathered face that had seen its share of sun and hard work. Didn't expect you back so soon, boss, he said, taking the reins of Adam's horse. Who's the lady? Hank, this is Miss Josephine Turner. She'll be staying in Pete's cabin and helping around the ranch for a while. Josephine, this is Hank Miller, the best foreman in the territory. Hank touched the brim of his hat. Madam, welcome to the Double A. Thank you, she replied, uncertain of the protocol but determined to appear composed. Any trouble while I was gone? Adam asked. Nothing worth mentioning. Boys are out checking the north pasture, should be back for supper. Adam nodded. Good, I'll show Miss Turner to the cabin. Have Miguel bring her things over when he has a moment. Will do, boss. As Hank led the horse away, Adam gestured for Josephine to follow him. The cook's cabin was small but clean, with a bed, a table with 2 chairs, a small stove, and a chest of drawers. A window looked out toward the main house. It's not much, Adam said, but it's private. Outhouse is out back. We have a bathhouse behind the main house. You're welcome to use it any time. Just let me know and I'll make sure the men give you privacy. Josephine ran her hand over the simple quilt on the bed. After months of sleeping on a thin pallet in her uncle's shack, this seemed luxurious. It's perfect. Thank you. I'll have Miguel bring over some supper once it's ready. Tomorrow I'll show you around properly and we can discuss your duties. She nodded, suddenly exhausted now that the tension of the day was fading. Adam paused at the door. Lock this tonight. Not that you need to worry about my men, they're good fellows, but it'll help you sleep easier. With that, he left, and Josephine was alone for the first time since that morning. She sank onto the bed, her emotions finally overwhelming her. Tears came in a flood, relief, fear, gratitude, and uncertainty all mingling together. But as she wiped them away, she made herself a promise. She would not be the useless woman they'd called her at the auction. She would work hard and repay Adam Archer's kindness. And then, when she had enough money saved, she would make her own way in the world. She had no idea then how completely that plan would change. The next morning, Josephine woke to the sound of roosters crowing and men's voices in the distance. For a moment she was disoriented, but then the events of the previous day came rushing back. She sat up, blinking in the early morning light filtering through the cabin's single window. A knock at the door startled her. She quickly smoothed her hair and straightened her dress before opening it to find a young Mexican man standing there with a bundle of clothing in his arms. "Buenos dias, señorita. I am Miguel. El Patron Mr. Archer asked me to bring these to you." He handed her the bundle. "They belonged to his sister when she visited last year. He thought they might fit you better than what you have." Josephine accepted the clothes with surprise. "Thank you, Miguel. That's very kind." "Breakfast is ready in the main house when you are hungry," he added with a smile before turning away. Josephine closed the door and examined the clothing. There were 2 simple work dresses, a skirt, 2 blouses, and undergarments, all of much better quality than her current attire. She changed quickly, grateful to find that the dress was only slightly too large. After washing her face in the basin and pinning up her hair as neatly as possible, she made her way to the main house. The kitchen was warm and filled with delicious smells. Miguel was at the stove while Adam and 3 other men sat at a large table, already eating. All conversation stopped when she entered. Adam stood immediately. "Good morning, Josephine. I hope you slept well." "Yes, thank you." She hesitated in the doorway, uncomfortable under the curious stares of the other men. "Come in and have some breakfast," Adam said, gesturing to an empty chair. "These are my hands, Tom, Bill, and Charlie. Boys, this is Miss Josephine Turner. She'll be helping around the ranch while Pete's away." The men nodded and murmured greetings, and Josephine took the offered seat. Miguel placed a plate of eggs, bacon, and biscuits in front of her, along with a cup of coffee. "Thank you for the clothing," she said to Adam once the men had resumed their conversation. "It was very thoughtful." "They're of no use to my sister in Boston," he replied with a shrug. "Might as well be put to good use." After breakfast, the men dispersed to their duties, and Adam gave Josephine a tour of the ranch. The double A was impressive, not the largest spread in the territory, but well-maintained and clearly prosperous. There was a vegetable garden behind the main house, a smokehouse, a springhouse for keeping milk and butter cool, and various barns and corrals. "I thought you might start by taking over the kitchen duties," Adam said as they walked. "Miguel's been doing his best since Pete left, but cooking isn't his strong suit. The men would appreciate some decent meals." "I can do that," Josephine agreed readily. "I'm a good cook." "And perhaps you could tend to the garden as well. It's been neglected lately." She nodded, relieved that the work seemed manageable. "I'm also handy with a needle if mending is needed." Adam looked pleased. "That would be helpful. The boys tear through shirts like they're made of paper." By midday, Josephine had familiarized herself with the kitchen and planned supper. The pantry was well stocked, and she found herself humming as she worked, relieved to have clear tasks and purpose. The next few weeks fell into a comfortable routine. Josephine rose early each morning to prepare breakfast for the men before they headed out to work. She spent her days cooking, tending the garden, mending clothes, and helping with other household tasks. In the evenings, after serving supper, she often sat on the porch of her cabin, watching the sunset and listening to the sounds of the ranch settling for the night. Adam was a fair employer. He never raised his voice, always thanked her for meals, and occasionally brought her small gifts from his trips into town: a ribbon for her hair, a book to read, once even a jar of peach preserves that he remembered she'd mentioned liking. The ranch hands were respectful, if sometimes awkward, around her. They clearly appreciated her cooking, especially her apple pies, which became a Sunday tradition. Hank, the foreman, was the most forthcoming, occasionally sitting with her in the evenings to tell stories about the early days of the territory. As June turned to July and the summer heat intensified, Josephine realized something unexpected. She was happy at the AA. For the first time since her parents died, she felt safe and valued. The nagging fear that had been her constant companion for years had begun to fade. She also found herself increasingly aware of Adam Archer. At first, she'd seen him simply as her benefactor, the man who'd rescued her from a terrible fate. But as the weeks passed, she began to notice other things about him. The way the corners of his eyes crinkled when he smiled, how gentle his hands were when he worked with the horses, the deep timbre of his voice when he sang softly to himself while working in the barn. Adam, for his part, seemed to seek out her company more frequently. He began taking his morning coffee on the porch while she worked in the garden, asking about her plans for the day. Sometimes in the evenings, he would bring his ledgers to the kitchen table while she cleaned up after supper, working silently in her presence rather than in his office. One evening in late July, a violent thunderstorm swept across the ranch. Josephine was awakened by a tremendous crash as lightning struck nearby. Rain lashed against her window, and the wind howled around the cabin's eaves. Suddenly, there was an urgent knocking at her door. She wrapped a shawl around her nightdress and opened it to find Adam standing there, rain dripping from his hat and coat. "The barn roof is leaking badly," he said without preamble. "We need to move the new foal and its mother to the storage shed. Can you help?" Without hesitation, Josephine grabbed her boots and coat, following Adam into the storm. The rain was blinding, the wind nearly knocking her off her feet as they ran to the barn. Inside, water was pouring through a section of the roof onto the stall where a nervous mare stood protectively over her week-old foal. Hank and Charlie were already there, trying to calm the agitated horse. "She won't let us near the foal," Hank shouted over a crash of thunder. "Let me try," Josephine said, moving forward slowly. The mare's ears flattened as she approached, but Josephine spoke softly, extending her hand palm up. "It's all right, girl. We're going to help you." Gradually, the horse calmed, allowing Josephine to stroke her neck. With patient coaxing, she was able to get a lead rope on the mare while Adam carefully lifted the foal in his arms. Together, they hurried through the rain to the storage shed, which was dry and had fresh hay on the floor. Once the animals were settled, the men returned to the barn to place buckets under the leaks, while Josephine stayed with the mare and foal, stroking them and murmuring reassurances. Adam returned about 20 minutes later, soaked to the skin but smiling. "That was impressive," he said, watching as the foal nursed contentedly. "How did you know what to do?" "My father raised horses," Josephine explained. "I helped deliver my first foal when I was 12. Adam's eyebrows rose. "You continue to surprise me, Josephine Turner." Their eyes met in the lantern light, and something shifted between them, a recognition, perhaps, or a possibility neither had acknowledged before. For a long moment, they simply looked at each other, the storm forgotten. Then Adam cleared his throat. "We should get back before we catch our death." Outside, the rain had lessened, though lightning still flickered in the distance. They walked in companionable silence until they reached Josephine's cabin. "Thank you for your help tonight," Adam said, pausing at her door. "I was glad to do it." He hesitated, as if wanting to say more, then simply nodded. "Good night, Josephine." "Good night, Adam." She watched him walk away, aware of a warmth in her chest that had nothing to do with exertion or the weather. Something had changed tonight, though she wasn't entirely sure what it might mean for her future at the AA. The next morning, Josephine woke early to check on the mare and foal. She found them contentedly settled in the storage shed, the foal nursing vigorously. As she stroked the mare's neck, she heard footsteps behind her. "They look no worse for wear," Adam said, coming to stand beside her. "They're fine. The foal is strong." Adam reached out to touch the foal's soft muzzle. "I'm thinking of calling him Thunderbolt, given the circumstances of last night." Josephine smiled. "It suits him." As they stood watching the horses, Adam spoke without looking at her. "I wanted to thank you again for last night. Not many women would have run out into a storm like that." "Not many women have had the opportunities I've had," she replied. "My father believed girls should learn the same skills as boys. He sounds like a wise man." "He was." She hesitated, then asked the question that had been on her mind for weeks. "How exactly did you know him?" "You mentioned he saved you at Antietam, but—" Adam's expression grew distant. "I was a young lieutenant, got separated from my unit in the confusion and took a bullet to the shoulder. Your father was a medic. He found me bleeding out in a field and dragged me to safety, even though I was wearing the wrong color uniform." Josephine stared at him in surprise. "My father fought for the Union. You were Confederate," Adam nodded slowly. "Does that trouble you?" She considered this. "The war's been over for 10 years, and my father obviously didn't hold it against you." "No, he didn't. He said something I've never forgotten. He said, 'Son, this war won't last forever, but the way we treat each other will echo through generations.'" Adam's voice softened with memory. "He patched me up, got me to a field hospital, and made sure I wasn't taken prisoner. I tried to find him after the war to thank him, but by then—" "By then he was gone," Josephine finished quietly. "Yes, I'm sorry. I should have tried harder to find you sooner." She shook her head. "You couldn't have known what would happen with my uncle." They stood in silence for a moment, the only sounds the soft nickering of the horses and the distant calls of morning birds. "Would you ride with me today?" Adam asked suddenly. "There's something I'd like to show you." Curious, Josephine agreed, and after breakfast they set out on horseback. Adam led her away from the ranch, following a stream that wound through the property and into the foothills. The day was cooler after the storm, the desert landscape washed clean and vibrant. After about an hour's ride, they reached a small valley nestled between rocky outcroppings. A clear pool fed by a spring occupied the center, surrounded by cottonwood trees and wildflowers that had sprung up after the rain. "It's beautiful," Josephine breathed as they dismounted. "It's my favorite place on the ranch," Adam said, leading the horses to the water. "I come here to think when things get overwhelming." They settled beneath one of the cottonwoods, and Adam produced a small bundle from his saddlebag: bread, cheese, and apples for an impromptu picnic. As they ate, Adam told her more about his life. After the war, he'd headed west like many ex-soldiers, working odd jobs until he won the nucleus of the double in a poker game 5 years earlier. The previous owner had let the place fall into disrepair, but Adam had worked tirelessly to build it into a profitable ranch. "What about you?" he asked. "What happened after your parents died?" Josephine's face clouded. "My Uncle Walter was my only living relative. He took me in, but he was not a kind man. He drank too much and gambled away whatever money came his way. I kept house for him, but nothing I did was ever good enough." She stared at the rippling water of the pool. "When he died owing money to half the men in the territory, his creditors decided I was part of his property to be sold off." Adam's jaw tightened. "That's not legal." "Perhaps not, but who was going to stop them? I had nowhere to go, no money, no friends nearby." She looked at him directly. "Until you came." Their eyes held, and Josephine felt a flutter in her stomach that had nothing to do with hunger. Adam moved slightly closer, his hand coming to rest beside hers on the blanket they sat on. "Josephine," he began, his voice husky. But whatever he intended to say was interrupted by the distant sound of a gunshot. Both of them tensed, listening intently. 2 more shots followed in quick succession. Adam was on his feet in an instant. "That came from the direction of the ranch. Something's wrong." They packed up hurriedly and mounted their horses, galloping back toward the AA. As they crested the final rise, they could see figures moving rapidly around the yard, the ranch hands rushing about with purpose. Hank ran to meet them as they rode in. "Rustlers," he reported grimly. "They hit the north pasture, took about 30 head of cattle and shot Charlie when he tried to stop them." "How bad?" Adam demanded, dismounting. Bullet grazed his arm. "Miguel's tending to him now. Bill and Tom are saddling up to go after the rustlers." Adam's expression hardened. Tell them to wait for me. I'll be ready in 5 minutes. Josephine followed him to the house. Is there anything I can do? Check on Charlie. And keep a rifle handy until we get back. These men could circle back to the ranch while we're tracking them. She nodded, hiding her fear behind determination. Be careful. Adam paused, looking at her intently. I will. We'll finish our conversation when I return. Then he was gone, striding toward the barn where the other men were preparing to ride out. Josephine watched him go, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear for his safety and anticipation of what he might have been about to say in that peaceful valley. The next hours were the longest of Josephine's life. She tended to Charlie's wound, which was painful but not serious, prepared food for the men to take with them, and then waited, a loaded rifle across her lap as she sat on the porch of the main house. Hank had stayed behind to protect the ranch, and he kept her company as darkness fell, assuring her that Adam was the best tracker in the territory and would return safely. But as the night wore on with no sign of the men, Josephine's anxiety grew. It was well past midnight when they finally heard horses approaching. Hank immediately grabbed his rifle, positioning himself in front of Josephine as they waited to see who was arriving. It's us, Adam's voice called out, and Josephine nearly collapsed with relief. The men rode into the yard, weary but triumphant. They had recovered most of the stolen cattle and captured 2 of the rustlers, though 3 others had escaped. We'll take these 2 to the marshal in town tomorrow, Adam said, indicating the bound men slumped on their horses. For now, lock them in the storage shed, post a guard. As the other hands led the prisoners away, Adam dismounted stiffly, wincing as he straightened. You're hurt, Josephine said, rushing to his side. It's nothing. One of them got off a lucky shot. Bullet just creased my side. But when she insisted on examining the wound in the lamplight of the kitchen, it was clear the injury was more serious than he claimed. The bullet had torn a deep furrow along his ribs, and though it hadn't lodged in his body, he'd lost a significant amount of blood. This needs cleaning and stitching, she said firmly. Sit down and take off your shirt. Too exhausted to argue, Adam complied while Josephine gathered clean cloths, a needle and thread, and a bottle of whiskey. She worked methodically, cleaning the wound first with water and then with alcohol, which made Adam hiss between clenched teeth. Sorry, she murmured, but we can't risk infection. Her hands were steady as she stitched the wound closed, having learned basic medical skills from her father. Adam watched her face as she worked, her brow furrowed in concentration, her bottom lip caught between her teeth. You would have made a fine doctor, he said softly. She smiled without looking up from her task. In another life, perhaps. When she finished, she wrapped clean bandages around his torso, acutely aware of his bare skin beneath her fingers, the solid muscle of his chest, the steady beat of his heart. There, she said, securing the bandage. Keep it clean and try not to pull the stitches. Yes, madam, he replied with a tired smile. Thank you. She helped him into a clean shirt, then insisted he eat something before retiring. As he ate the stew she'd kept warm for the men's return, Josephine sat across from him, relief making her light-headed now that the danger had passed. You should get some rest, Adam said, noticing her fatigue. It's been a long day for everyone. She nodded, rising to her feet. Will you be all right? I've had worse, he assured her. Good night, Josephine. Good night, Adam. But as she turned to leave, he caught her hand. Thank you. Not just for this, he gestured to his bandaged side, but for everything. The double A has become more of a home since you arrived. The warmth of his hand around hers sent a flutter through her chest. I'm glad to be here, she said softly, and meant it more than she'd ever meant anything. The next morning, Adam and Bill left early to take the captured rustlers to the territorial marshal in the nearest town, a journey that would keep them away for at least 2 days. Josephine threw herself into work to keep from worrying, but found herself repeatedly glancing down the road, hoping to see familiar riders appearing. When they hadn't returned by the 3rd day, Hank admitted he was concerned. Should have been back by now, he muttered as they stood on the porch at sunset. Unless there was trouble. "What kind of trouble?" Josephine asked, her stomach knotting with fear. Hank shrugged uncomfortably. "Could be anything. Bad weather in the pass, horse coming up lame, or the other rustlers could have ambushed them," she finished. "It's possible. Those men were part of the Leighton gang. They don't take kindly to losing men or money." Josephine barely slept that night, her mind conjuring terrible scenarios. By morning, she had made a decision. After serving breakfast to the remaining hands, she approached Hank. "I want to ride to town to look for Adam and Bill," she announced. Hank's bushy eyebrows shot up. "Now, Miss Josephine, that ain't a good idea." "It's a long ride, and with those rustlers still out there, I can ride as well as any man," she interrupted. "And I won't go alone. You or one of the others can accompany me." "The boss wouldn't like it," Hank protested. "The boss isn't here to object," she countered. "And if he's in trouble, every hour could matter." Hank sighed, recognizing the determination in her eyes. "All right, but I'm coming with you and we're taking the rifle." They set out within the hour, riding hard toward the town of Copper Creek. The journey took most of the day, and it was late afternoon when they finally arrived, dust-covered and weary. The town was small but bustling, with a main street lined with the usual establishments: saloon, general store, hotel, and at the far end, the marshal's office. Josephine and Hank headed there first, tying their horses outside the small wooden building. Inside, they found a grizzled older man with a marshal's badge pinned to his vest, his boots propped on a scarred desk. "Marshal Jenkins?" Hank inquired. The man nodded, looking them over with interest. "That's me. What can I do for you folks?" "We're looking for Adam Archer and Bill Taylor from the Double-A Ranch," Hank explained. "They should have brought you 2 rustlers a couple days ago." Jenkins frowned, dropping his feet to the floor. "Archer? Yeah, he was here. Brought in 2 of the Leighton boys on Tuesday, left the same day heading back to his spread." Josephine's heart sank. "They never arrived." The marshal's expression grew serious. "That's not good. The rest of the Leighton gang has been spotted in the area. I warned Archer they might try something." "We need to find them," Josephine said urgently. Jenkins nodded. "I'll organize a search party at first light. In the meantime, you 2 should get rooms at the hotel. Nothing to be done in the dark." But Josephine wasn't willing to wait. After securing rooms at the hotel, she convinced Hank to help her ask around town if anyone had seen Adam or Bill. Their inquiries eventually led them to a young cowhand who remembered seeing 2 men matching their descriptions leaving town on the North Road. "But they weren't alone," he added. "About an hour later, I saw 3 rough-looking fellas heading out the same way. One of them was Joe Leighton himself. Recognized him from the wanted posters." This confirmed Josephine's worst fears. She and Hank returned to the marshal with this information, and Jenkins agreed to gather men immediately rather than waiting for morning. "There's a line shack about 15 miles north of town," he told them. "The Leightons have used it before. If they've got your men, that's where they'd take them." Josephine insisted on joining the search party despite the marshal's objections. "I'm coming," she said firmly, "and nothing you say will stop me." Jenkins looked to Hank for support, but the foreman just shrugged. "No use arguing with her when she gets that look, Marshal. Besides, she's a better shot than half your deputies, I'd wager." The marshal grudgingly relented, and within an hour, a group of 8 riders, including Josephine, set out under the light of a nearly full moon. They rode in silence, alert for any sign of ambush, following a trail that wound through increasingly rugged terrain. After about 2 hours, they reached a ridge overlooking a small valley. Below, barely visible in the moonlight, was a dilapidated cabin with a faint light showing through its single window. "That's it," Jenkins whispered. "The line shack." They dismounted and approached on foot, moving silently through the scrub brush. As they drew closer, Josephine could make out 3 horses tethered outside the cabin. The marshal organized the men to surround the shack, then signaled for 2 deputies to approach the door while the others covered them. Josephine, despite instructions to stay back, crept forward until she could peer through a gap in the cabin's wall. What she saw made her blood run cold. Adam and Bill were inside, bound to chairs. Adam's face was bruised and bloody, his shirt torn to reveal the bandages she had applied, now stained red with fresh blood. Three men lounged around the small space, one cleaning a knife, the others drinking from a bottle. "Last chance, Archer," one of the men was saying. "Tell us where the money is or your friend here loses some fingers." Adam's voice was hoarse but defiant. "I told you, Leighton, there is no money. Your men were stealing my cattle, not the other way around." The man with the knife, presumably Joe Leighton, moved toward Bill, who struggled against his bonds. Josephine didn't wait to see more. She rushed back to the marshal. "They're going to torture them," she whispered urgently. "We need to move now." Jenkins nodded grimly and gave the signal. The deputies burst through the door while the rest of the posse covered the windows. "Drop your weapons. Marshal's office," Jenkins shouted. What followed was a blur of shouting and gunfire. Josephine, ignoring orders to stay back, darted toward the cabin as soon as the shooting stopped. Inside, she found one of the Leighton gang dead, another wounded, and the third, Joe Leighton himself, in handcuffs. But her eyes sought only Adam. He was still tied to the chair, his head slumped forward. For one terrible moment, she thought they were too late, but then he raised his head, his eyes finding hers across the room. "Josephine," he croaked, disbelief in his voice. "What are you doing here?" She rushed to him, tears streaming down her face as she untied his bonds. "Looking for you, you fool. Did you think I'd just sit at home wondering what happened?" A ghost of a smile touched his battered lips. "Should have known you'd come, too stubborn to stay put." Once freed, he tried to stand but staggered, weakened by blood loss and the beatings he'd endured. Josephine caught him, supporting his weight against her side. "Bill?" Adam asked, looking around anxiously. "He's all right," Hank assured him, helping the other ranch hand to his feet. "Roughed up, but nothing permanent." The journey back to town was slow and difficult. Adam insisted on riding his own horse despite his injuries, though Josephine stayed close beside him, ready to catch him if he faltered. They reached Copper Creek as dawn was breaking, the town doctor waiting to tend to the wounded men. Josephine refused to leave Adam's side as the doctor cleaned and stitched his reopened wound and treated his other injuries. When the doctor finally declared he would recover with rest, she nearly collapsed with relief. "You need sleep," Adam told her as she sat beside his bed in the doctor's back room. "You've been up all night." "So have you," she countered. "And you've been beaten half to death." "I've had worse," he insisted, though his grimace as he shifted position belied his words. Josephine shook her head. "Always the tough cowboy. Just rest, Adam. I'll be here when you wake up." He caught her hand, his grip surprisingly strong despite his weakened state. "Why did you come after me?" The question hung in the air between them, loaded with unspoken meaning. Josephine could have given a practical answer that the ranch needed him, that it was the right thing to do. But looking into his eyes, she found she couldn't dissemble. "Because I couldn't bear the thought of losing you," she said softly. Something changed in his expression, then a softening, a wonder. His thumb brushed across her knuckles. "Josephine." But whatever he meant to say was lost as exhaustion overtook him, his eyes drifting closed despite his evident desire to continue the conversation. Josephine stayed, watching the rise and fall of his chest, her hand still held in his even as he slept. It was 3 days before the doctor declared Adam fit to travel back to the ranch. During that time, Josephine rarely left his side, sleeping in a chair beside his bed, bringing him meals, and helping him walk when he insisted on testing his strength. The journey home was taken at a gentle pace, with frequent stops to allow Adam to rest. Bill, less seriously injured, rode ahead with Hank to inform the others at the ranch of their return. As they traveled, Adam and Josephine talked more openly than they ever had before. He told her of his dreams for the double, expanding the herd, breeding horses, perhaps building a larger house someday. She shared memories of her parents and her childhood in Pennsylvania, stories she had kept locked away since their deaths. They reached the ranch late on the 3rd day, the familiar buildings a welcome sight after their ordeal. The hands greeted Adam with relief and respect, and Josephine felt a surge of pride for this man who had created not just a business but a community. That evening, after ensuring Adam was comfortably settled in his room with everything he needed, Josephine stepped onto the porch for a breath of fresh air. The sky was ablaze with stars, the night air carrying the scent of sage and distant rain. She heard the door open behind her and turned to find Adam moving slowly but steadily. "You shouldn't be up," she scolded gently. "Needed some air," he replied, coming to stand beside her at the porch railing. "And to finish our conversation," her heart quickened. "Which one?" "We've had several lately. The one that keeps getting interrupted, the one that started by that pool under the cottonwoods." Josephine turned to face him fully, aware that they had reached a moment of consequence. "I'm listening." Adam's eyes, silver in the moonlight, held hers steadily. "When I saw you on that auction block, I thought I was just repaying a debt to your father, but it's become so much more than that." He took her hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "These past weeks, watching you build a place for yourself here, seeing your strength and kindness. I never expected to find someone like you, Josephine." "Adam," she began, but he gently placed a finger against her lips. "Let me finish before something interrupts us again," he said with a small smile. "I'm not good with pretty words. I'm just a rancher who's worked hard for everything he has. But everything I have, everything I am, it's yours if you want it." Josephine's breath caught in her throat as he continued. "I love you, Josephine Turner. I think I started falling in love with you that first night when you stood in my kitchen and told me you weren't useless." His smile widened. "You were right about that. You're the most capable, remarkable woman I've ever known." Joy bubbled up within her, bright and effervescent. "Are you asking me to stay on as your cook, Mr. Archer?" she teased, her voice unsteady with emotion. He laughed softly. "No, Miss Turner. I'm asking you to stay on as my wife." "Yes," she said without hesitation, her heart so full it felt it might burst. "Yes, I'll be your wife." Adam drew her gently into his arms, mindful of his healing wounds, and kissed her. It was a tender kiss, full of promise and certainty, and Josephine knew in that moment that the auction block that had seemed her lowest point had actually been the beginning of her greatest blessing. They were married 2 weeks later in the small church in Copper Creek, with the ranch hands as witnesses and Marshall Jenkins giving the bride away. Josephine wore a simple white dress ordered from Tucson, with wildflowers in her hair. Adam, still moving carefully but healing well, looked handsome and proud in a new black suit. The ceremony was brief but heartfelt, the couple exchanging vows they had written themselves. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Adam kissed his bride to the cheers and whistles of their friends, his eyes shining with love and promise. The celebration afterward at the double lasted well into the night, with music and dancing and more food than the ranch had ever seen at one time. As the evening drew to a close, Adam led Josephine to the main house, now their house, where he swept her into his arms at the threshold. "Welcome home, Mrs. Archer," he said, carrying her inside despite her protests about his healing wounds. "You'll tear your stitches," she warned, though she made no move to leave his arms. "Worth it," he replied with a grin, kicking the door closed behind them. The next morning, they sat together on the porch, watching the sunrise and planning their future. Adam spoke of expanding the ranch, of the children they might have someday. Josephine shared her ideas for improvements to the house and garden, for teaching the children of nearby homesteaders to read and write. As they talked, a rider appeared on the horizon, approaching the ranch at a leisurely pace. As he drew closer, they recognized the territorial marshal. "Jenkins," Adam greeted him as the lawman dismounted. "What brings you out this way? Nothing wrong, I hope?" "Nothing wrong," Jenkins assured him, accepting the cup of coffee Josephine offered. "Just bringing some news you might find interesting." He explained that after further questioning, the captured Layton gang members had revealed the location of their hideout. When the marshal's posse raided it, they found not only stolen cattle and horses, but also a substantial amount of money proceeds from their thieving operations. The territorial judge ruled that the recovered funds should be distributed to the gang's victims as compensation, Jenkins said, pulling an envelope from his pocket. This is your share, Archer, for the cattle they stole and the trouble they caused. Adam opened the envelope, his eyebrows rising at the amount. This is generous. It's fair, Jenkins replied. You took the worst of it, bringing in those two by yourselves. After the marshal departed, Adam and Josephine sat looking at the money more than enough to fund the expansions they had just been discussing. It seems our future is arriving faster than we expected, Adam said, putting his arm around his wife. Josephine leaned against him, contentment washing over her. Our future started the moment you paid that dollar for me. Adam smiled, pressing a kiss to her temple. Best dollar I ever spent. 5 years later, the Double-A Ranch had grown into one of the most prosperous spreads in the territory. The herd had tripled in size, the horse breeding operation was renowned throughout the Southwest, and the main house had been expanded to accommodate a growing family. On a warm summer evening, Josephine stood on the porch, watching Adam teaching their 4-year-old son Thomas to ride his pony in the yard. Their 2-year-old daughter Elizabeth played nearby, carefully arranging rocks and sticks into patterns that made sense only to her. As Josephine cradled her swollen belly, feeling the movements of their third child due in just a month, she reflected on the journey that had brought her here. From the humiliation of that auction block to the joy of this moment, it seemed almost impossible that only 5 years had passed. Adam looked up, catching her eye across the yard, and smiled the special smile he reserved just for her. He lifted Thomas from the pony and set him on his feet, then walked toward the porch, his stride still carrying the slight unevenness from his old injuries. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, climbing the steps to stand beside her. "You looked miles away." Josephine smiled, leaning into him as his arm circled her waist. "I was thinking about how lucky I am, how one moment changed everything." "The auction," he guessed, his voice softening. She nodded. "They called me useless that day, said I wasn't worth the feed I'd eat." Adam's arm tightened around her. Even now, the memory of that day could raise his protective instincts. "They were fools," he said firmly, "blind fools who couldn't see what was right in front of them." "Or perhaps they did me a favor," Josephine mused. "If they'd praised me highly, set a high price, someone else might have bought me. I might never have met you." Adam turned her gently to face him, his hands framing her face. "I would have found you," he said with quiet certainty. "One way or another, I believe we were meant to find each other." Josephine smiled, covering his hands with her own. "The cowboy who paid $1 found his wife." "And his heart," Adam added softly, bending to kiss her as their children played in the yard and the sun set over the land they had built together, a family and a legacy born from a single silver dollar, and the love that had grown from that humble beginning. As they stood there in the fading light, Josephine knew with absolute certainty that some journeys, no matter how difficult their starting point, led exactly where they were meant to go. And sometimes, the places others deemed worthless contained the greatest treasures of all.